Welcome to another Conversations with Architects program. Today we have a guest, Mrs. Helen Castle, and she's the editor of Architectural Design magazine, AD, and also she's the commissioning editor on the UK architectural list at John Wiley, as far as I know. And she started to work at architectural design in early 90s.
In the early 90s, yes, that long ago now.
But she came back as an editor. She is originally an historian, art historian, but you have masters in architectural history, as far as I know.
From the Bartlett,
UCLA and Bartlett School of Art and History. And it's a very nice coincidence that I was talking to Helen just before this recording, that I was in UK in 1990s and I was making my PhD research, and my major topic was architectural criticism, and I was trying to get into some comparative analysis of the architectural magazines, including AD. So, I mean, it is a really nice coincidence that years after, once again, we are talking about the magazine. And, of course, many things had been changed since then. But maybe before getting into that, not specifically on architectural design, but in the sphere of architectural publishing and media, lots of things had been changed. Now we have a digital media, which seems to be an alternative track, not only in terms of the methodology of publishing, but also the content, how it spreads and how it is open to interaction, interactive contributions, etc. So maybe we can start there, how it affected all these things within the years. So can you look, where do you locate within all this sphere, the current architectural design magazine?
It's a big question, and it's a question that anyone in publishing is thinking about all the time, because the shift is so enormous, and you cannot afford to stand still and not think about it. And the publisher I work for is really taking on the whole transition. And they're looking at a transition situation where e-learning and online learning and accreditation are going to be really important things, because they're really a textbook and a professional publisher, and that's where they see the future and the future growth as well. But on the other hand, I think the editorial part of publishing remains very important. It remains important for subject knowledge and also the network that you have. And at the core still, despite the transition, is book and journal publishing. And although we've had electronic, AD's been published electronically for almost 10 years online through the Wiley Online platform.
But it's the simulation of the hard copy.
Exactly. It's still a kind of post-production model, and that's what you've seen in book publishing, a lot of magazine publishing as well. It's not really shifted, and I think the last 3 or 4 years you've had the tablet has come through very strongly, so social media's come through very strongly, and with that, you've had apps, etc. But I think the next change, which everyone is going to really have to push on, is mobiles, and how you're going to get content in a way which is short enough, digestible enough for mobiles, and is reflowable as well. So for architecture, which is so highly visual, that is a real challenge, and that's something that everybody's got to think about. But I think, kind of going back to your question about how do you work with social media, there is no one way. You know, you've got to think back. You've got to think back with when radio used to predominate, you know, and then TV came in, and everyone thought, oh, radio's going to die. Radio didn't die, but you're going to have simultaneous media. But what has happened is you no longer got the domination of a broadcasting media. You've got social media, which is responding to things, and individuals responding to things. So the kind of responsibility is taken away from solely from the media, and individuals have now able to enter the framework. But I think what's interesting with architects is they still want to be in print, or they still want to be in the electronic magazine, and they're using often social media as a route to get into it. But it's all those things happening at the same time.
Actually, there is a significant difference as far as I recognize between those simulated versions of already existing hard copy magazines, but there is an alternative channel which is more open to contributions, and you cannot follow whether there is an editorial board, somebody else, etc. So it is like hundreds, thousands of images are appearing at a time.
So it's uncurated.
Uncurated.
It's simultaneous. It's a different stream altogether. It's much more instant. It's faster. Now, I think what you've got to look at is there's going to be, you've got to look at the speed of media, and a lot of conversations. Often I'm asked, well, you know, with AD being a magazine, well, it's not quite a magazine. We haven't had the same problems as news-driven print media, because they're so dependent, whereas they've been taken on by Arc Daily and dizisinin and all the online news magazines. Whereas because we're at the point where we're between a book and a magazine, we're faster than a book, slightly slower than a magazine or a news-driven magazine. That's actually been an advantage in a strange way, because we're commissioning articles which reflect a little bit. And there is still within academia the appetite, and among architects, for that kind of more reflexive kind of look at things. But on the other hand, I'm very aware of things like word counts, for instance. I really cap articles at about 2,000, 2,500 words, because I think long articles don't make better articles, but also, you know, people want things which are fairly digestible and quick. And it's also, AD's always had this sort of particular position. It's not academic. It's between the kind of really theoretical magazines and the kind of professional or news-driven architecture magazines.
That's how I classified it.
Yeah, this is what I was. This is what I was going to ask you about, where you positioned it.
Architectural Review, for example, is a professional magazine, whereas Assemblage is it was a very academic magazine, but AD was in between, both targeting the architects and the academicians at the time. So it had a kind of a power, actually, to both be effective in two cultural domains, within the professionals, within the academicians. So it was kind of a transitory medium. And I think it's very significantly important. Otherwise, I mean, we may be in a position of talking the same thing in two different ways, and there may be some discontinuities between the concepts, issues, etc. I don't know how it is today, actually, because I'm within all these hundreds and millions of sites and images, etc. It is very difficult to trace what's happening. But I think the magazine, AD, still has a power in the architectural domain. Do you think that? I mean,
well, people seem to still pay attention. And I think people like curated content because of, you know, as you say, there's all these images going around, there's this sort of speed. people don't always know what to pay attention to. So every issue, AD comes out bi-monthly, so 6 issues a year, and each one is framed, if you like, with a theme. So that means that kind of level of curated content it gives people an understanding of, is this an important theme, or is it something I'm interested in? And so I think that's very important. And within publishing, I feel very, very strongly that a lot of publishers have saved money on editorial side of publishing just because they've had to kind of save money on the bottom line. And I think if publishing is going to exist as an industry, it needs to continue to invest in editors, as curators and developers of content.
Yes,
because otherwise, why exist? Why not? You'll become a packager, basically.
You obtain a kind of a power to set the agenda, but also in return, it also defines a sense of responsibility, which is not easy to tackle with maybe sometimes. And it was very dominant as far as I remember in the between 90s and 2000. I mean, every issue was coming out to redesign the architectural environment in terms of what is going to be discussed and what concepts, issues, etc. So, for example, the postmodernism topic had been nearly represented by the magazine, and it was a period. All these not only Charles Jenks, but
also deconstruction. You had postmodernism, deconstruction, and even classicism all going on at the same time.
Prince Charles.
The whole Prince Charles debate and the sort of style debates that were going on. What was interesting was when I came to AD in the early 2000s, I had to look at it and say it seemed a little bit dated, because suddenly the notion of kind of framing movements, if you like, or styles didn't really work. It worked isms, isms. It really worked very well in the 80s or the 1990s, but it didn't really seem relevant. And that's when we took a real interest in technology, in the digital stuff, and asking questions about technology. And I think that really worked for us. We've had some
culture as well.
Maybe, both social, cultural, and technological issues, and also urban issues. I think those are probably the kind of strongest themes in AD in the last 10 years or so that we've really dealt with.
What do you think? I mean, today, what does AD represent in terms of architectural medium? I mean, how do you identify the significant place of AD? What does it represent?
I think, as you say, it's this position between the academic and the professionals, and also a place to reflect, which I think is important. I think AD is being used in a different way, because our biggest audience are receiving it as students through the Wiley Online Library. So we get about 30,000 downloads a month of individual articles. So they're not always looking at it as a whole issue. They might be doing a project and then they'll read an individual article. And we kind of, when I started editing AD, I kind of we sort of reworked it over the years in terms of format. But an important thing was, for instance, we put in leader lines, we put in captions, so that you can read it at a kind of caption level and a leader line level, and also into kind of main text level as well.
That's very important. I mean, it of course multiplies the number of audience and the cultural levels that are interested. So, how do you draw the borders in terms of what is going to be in the magazine and what is not? Maybe. Well, it's more difficult to decide what's not going to take place in the.
Well, AD.
Is there a border like that? Of course.
I'll tell you what the sort of whole process is. Every issue of AD is guest edited, Now, so what is key is firstly who the guest editor is going to be
Yes.
and what the theme is. Now, that is quite a kind of, I have more proposals than I can ever possibly do. I have an awful lot of interest because I think a lot of young architects and academics have seen it as a really kind of an important tool in their careers.
That's true, yes.
And so I have a kind of whole network of people that I talk to about architecture, about guest editing issues, and often people will say, can I send you a proposal? And I say, no, don't send me a proposal, just tell me what theme you'd like to do, and then we'll have a chat about it. So it's fairly organic. So I agree with someone, yes, let's do a theme, how we do it, then they'll do a proposal and they'll suggest people.
That's very interesting.
And then about 10 months beforehand, we have a final proposal. So they really sort of have then spoken to people and have really keyed in. But I will always keep talking to people and suggesting other people to them. There's also a review process so that we send out the proposal to other people to look at. So we keep bringing people in. And also the kind of the geography is very important for AD because it's really got to be international. I mean, you could probably look at it and say, actually, there's a very strong US, UK bias, but we always try and include stuff from around the world as well.
And the context is inevitably including this, all these international issues, because lots of now architects from Britain are working all around the world. And I mean, it is very difficult to follow locality, but the international sense of architecture becomes valid in every geography, and I don't know, it's becoming a kind of a very complicated discussion.
It has become complicated, but it's very interesting. I think that sense of the local is, and that's something we've looked at as well, is that kind of locality. We always do an issue every year on a different area. We've done an issue on Turkey a few years ago. We've done one on Italy. We've done one on Latin America. We're doing one on the Gulf at the moment for 2015, and then I've commissioned one from Brazil for 2016. So we'll take individual issues, and they tend to often be more about the urban, and look at those, but also within each issue we try and get contributors from different countries as well involved.
Then can we say that there is still a sense of centrality
there is,
and periphery in terms of architecture?
There is, and I think, also it's a lot to do with publishing in English. So even if you've got architects from around the world, often they've been American or UK educated as well. So they're in that kind of network. They're in a kind of US, UK network, even if they might be practicing in Turkey or practicing in Japan, So, or China, the whole education system has been so internationalized, but there's still, I don't know, there's still a kind of locality. I was talking to an architect yesterday, and she was talking about her interests and the fact that she'd been at the AA at a certain time. You could just tell from her particular interest in the material, for instance.
But what I feel is, there is a hidden sense of centrality. I don't want to call it West-East issue, but I don't know, a kind of a mainstream, where, there's a significant dominancy of still maybe Britain, UK, some other European countries, and especially United States of America. So they are
the UK's been very, I think there's...
They're setting the standards.
And it's come from two things. I think the English language, they've had a huge advantage. But also the English language has also meant that they've been able to sort of export education. So a lot of people come to the UK and US to get educated for that reason. But also when the economy dived, basically 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of the big practices in London and the US were very successful in exporting their work to the Middle East and to Asia as well. the likes of HOK and SOM and Gensler and Arup and Foster's and Zaha. They all have very successfully worked in those areas.
Do they also represent a kind of a significant similarity in terms of their architectural behavior? Or, I mean, is it just
I think
a geography-free tendency? Or is it maybe technology-bound, knowledge-bound, culture-bound? I don't know.
I think, yeah, it's very difficult to, I think culturally say Foster's is quite different from SOM. But yes.
SOM is usually understood as a kind of a more business-oriented firm.
Yeah, much more business-orientated.
We look from here, yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, there's a very kind of strong sense of investment in technology and research that's gone on in those big practices as well.
Engineering, yeah.
And engineering.
Side is very powerful.
There's, you know, but some of the sort of medium-sized UK practices have also kind of reached out, like Allies Morrison, and they were medium-sized, but they've got bigger, and are working outside the UK as well.
When you look at architectural history books, I mean, most of the examples, maybe we are trying to understand all the isms and the history of architecture, meaning of architecture, via maybe, I don't know, 500 examples or 1,000 examples. I don't know. It is really a reductionist manner of putting things together to make them more clearly understandable. But I mean, within that, the issue of locality and anything non-Western or non-central cannot find easily a place within that bulk of knowledge. Is it something natural with respect to economy, dominancy in politics and language-based issues, or is it a kind of a? I mean, when you look at the accumulation, the heritage, is it the case, or I mean, how do you look?
I think there have been forces which have really tried hard. I mean, I think what the Aga Khan Foundation, for instance, has done is absolutely fantastic, and they've brought attention to really wonderfully crafted buildings with a very strong sense of community, and they've brought them to the world stage, and they've got them across people's, you know, into magazines, online. Those projects would never been brought to people's attention. I think that's very important that continues. But there aren't many other ways that those kind of projects can be brought to people's attention.
In a meeting which was organized in Pakistan by the Ahan committee, I thought that, I mean, I see Ahan Award as something, a kind of a toy given the others, in quotations, to play in their back garden. So I mean, I mean, if it is a kind of a quality architecture and good buildings, it is good anywhere. But I'm talking about the more reproduction kind of architecture.
Not so vernacular. I mean, there's a sort of tradition of the vernacular.
Because when we look at, for example, Gulf region, even Turkey, most of the emerging countries, now the architectural produced is just a simulation of whatever happening in the international era. So, I mean, there is no sense of locality at all.
No, I think...
So when I look at, for example, Foster, when they go to Kazakhstan, I mean, they don't tend to do either anything related with the local issues, or, I mean, they take it to the extreme that they are simulating a tent, for example, as a modern building. I mean, in between, you cannot find anything.
Well, it was very interesting. When I went to Abu Dhabi, I went to a Mazda. That is an example of something where they've tried, Foster's have really tried to do something significantly different. And
that's a very unique project.
It's a unique project. And there are rather a lot of gizmos which aren't needed, like this sort of underground transport. But the really good thing about it, after you've spent a week in Dubai, just getting there and being able to walk through narrow shaded streets, and that just kind of makes perfect sense after kind of spending your whole time in air-conditioned offices and hotels. So I think that was a unique project, but there's always going to be the problem for global architects that they're being asked by clients basically to produce a Foster building, which is, you know, it's all about kudos, it's all about lending value in a particular way to some sort of scheme. So they're kind of playing a game.
That's perfectly true. Frank Gehry was saying in one of his interviews that if I design anything which doesn't look like Guggenheim, people became disappointed.
Yes, yes. Well, that is the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem.
You know, they're getting. People are coming to them. People go to Zaha. They want a Zaha building.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and she does it.
Yeah,
everywhere. It became a kind of a really Zaha is another issue to be maybe talked with hours and hours, because when I look at my students, I mean, she's very popular in Turkey as any elsewhere. And even though we define a, for example, kindergarten project in a small village, whatever it is, independent from the context, there are a series of simulations of Zaha in any studio. So it becomes a ism by itself. And we don't know where the roots are coming from, what is this. So the danger with the digital media, I think, something may became a kind of a may be appreciated and may be open to reproduction without any critical background or any discussion.
It's
just
all
because
about
of
image.
the repetition of the image for 100 times, it becomes suddenly as if it's something positive or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, because the proliferation of a particular image becomes predominant.
Yeah, that's true.
And images work so much better on social media than anything else.
That's true.
You know, well, particularly in Facebook. Something like Twitter, you have to have very quick, witty quips for it to work, you know. But still, it's quite difficult in a sort of more extended critical way to work. I think there's always been a tendency for strong styles in architecture. You know, you have to look back at modernism, and there's always been the tendency for strong styles, but it does remove the dialogue from the image. It removes the text from the image. That is a big issue. I think one of the things, actually, I've commissioned an issue for 2015, which I'm really looking forward to, and that's on the rural and architecture. I think there's been a huge amount of interest in the city, and you know, I think young architects are interested in the city and the diversity of the city, and that is probably where they leave behind the kind of more formal work like Zaha, and become interested in the kind of natural composition and the kind of chaos of a city. And perhaps we need to do the same for the rural, and to look at things which are more site-specific and can work in the context.
Yes, but what I see, especially in Turkey, I mean, it's the rural architecture or vernacular or traditional, whatever it is, doesn't take enough appreciation in the way that, I mean, it can be understood, discussed, and kind of contribute to the knowledge of architecture.
It's not shiny enough.
It's not shiny enough, yes.
I mean, we're doing a book with Michael Hensel, who teaches now in Oslo, who was at the AA, and it's something I'm very interested in, is the fact that there's this kind of deep vernacular knowledge, particularly around sort of, you know, climatic conditions. Like in Turkey, you know, you didn't need air conditioning because the building, with very low energy, you didn't need even hardly any energy supply because you had shutters, you had different screens.
That's true, yeah.
And, you know, you need kind of higher energy when you've got glass buildings and air conditioning and things. So there is a route to doing contemporary architecture which doesn't mimic the vernacular in terms of kind of producing kind of a pastiche.
Yeah, that's.
But actually uses the uses the technologies or ancient technologies to do a new kind of architecture. But it is difficult unless something is shiny, attractive, and exciting to get students' attention.
Yeah, that's true. How do you see? Is this the first time you're coming to Turkey, or you've been?
I've been to Turkey before, but I've not been to Istanbul. So no, it's really exciting.
But you made a special issue on contemporary architecture in Turkey, so you have a general idea. How do you see the contemporary architectural scene in Turkey?
Well, it's really, I can't pretend that I know anything about the contemporary scene here. It's only what I'm really hearing secondhand from people.
Do you know any Turkish architects, for example?
Not really, no. No, I've only people I've met while I've been here. So I can't make a judgment.
So I'm the first Turkish architect you met.
I've met a few architects while I'm here, but I can't pretend that I've got a deep knowledge at all. I think there's a kind of modesty when people are always talking to me and they're saying, you know, there's a kind of modesty about Turkish architecture. And I'm not quite sure where that comes from, because in a way, you know, you've got a very ancient tradition, fantastic tradition of historical buildings, but also of modernism as well in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think Turks are very canny. I think they've always been at the kind of geographically at the crossroads as well, and to take advantage of the situation in the Middle East and Europe and the States, and also well educated. You know, quite so many. You know, everyone is speaking English to me and have such a wide knowledge of. You know, not often you go to a country. If you go to the US, you wouldn't find that architects would be able to talk about, you know, the international scene or what was happening elsewhere in the world, like Turkish architects can. True. And maybe just having a little bit more confidence or a sense of what they can go out and do is important.
But just looking at Istanbul within maybe a few hours and as an image, what do you feel, I mean, when you look at the city?
Well, the sort of natural setting on the Bosphorus is just second to none. But I think the other thing is just the amount of rebuilding. That it's just kind of like the construction is going on every street, all over the place. And, you know, that talking to people, for instance, about the whole sort of urban development program that's going on at the moment is intriguing.
There was a panel on that urban development program, and I have shown two comparative pictures. One of them was the Oxford Street in London, and I showed that it was like this in 18 something, and now it is like this. So you cannot feel the difference if you don't see the people and the cars, maybe, because it's staying still. But it's very difficult to find such places in Istanbul. And I have shown some photographs from Istanbul. This is 10 years ago, this is 5 years ago, and this is today. And there was an immense alteration and change. So, I mean, on one hand, it may be seen as development and modernization, whatever it is. But on the other hand, of course, it is blurring the sources of culture into something else, and it's the identity is shifting to something else. And I think we have to, we are not seeking for a kind of a, I don't know, maybe a local architecture or something, but it is not. It's the same problem everywhere in the world, that global architecture, I mean, comes without any context respect. Yeah, that is, I think, the basic issue, and it houses itself in a more free and accelerated way in geographies like Turkey, when there is no critical distance to what is happening actually. In that sense, the critical discussion is significantly important.
I mean, there's positives and negatives about it. I mean, in the UK, things are so slow, can be so slow, and the planning process can be...
Because you don't have the pressure of population, economy, as much as felt in Turkey.
But we do have a huge housing shortage in London now. And part of that is a problem with basically foreign investors coming and buying up housing within central London, and it actually means that even fairly wealthy young professionals just can't afford flats within London or even the suburbs of London. It's become prohibitively expensive because it's just been so attractive for people from the Middle East and Asia, and it's been it's been a safe haven, really.
International city, yes.
So there is an issue really about housing and being able to have affordable housing for the people who are living and working in London.
Do you have a chance to follow, I mean, especially the British architects who are working in Turkey? Have you
Well, I come across odd schemes. You know, I think there have been big design competitions. People like Zaha, and I remember Ken Yang did one as well.
Yes.
But it's often quite difficult. You'll see a design competition and then you don't know if those things ever really get built as well. Yeah.
In Zaha's case, and it hasn't been realized, so it was a kind of a planning competition, including, of course, some building images, but it hasn't been realized. But I think there are some other ongoing building scale projects. Norman Foster is realizing a building in central Istanbul. I know that Frank Gehry has a proposal, and Zaha is coming back, as far as I know. Peter Eisenman is designing something for Istanbul.
What is the feeling among the community of architects in Istanbul? Do they feel that those big projects in terms of status shouldn't go to international architects, that they should be given to Turkish architects?
There are different positions actually, because some of them think that it is good to be collaborating with those big firms, because I mean, independent from what is produced, the knowledge comes to Turkey. I mean, how an institutional office works and what kind of a quality produced throughout the projects, etc. That is something well admired. But on the other hand, there's a group, of course, reacting as if, I mean, those offices do not really represent their full existence within the medium of architecture. So they see Turkey as a kind of a peripheral land, so they don't care much attention. But it's a problem all around the world because, I mean, there used to be, I'm always giving this example, in 1950s or something, when you are educated in France, they give you a diploma which is titled Bon pour Orient, which is, I mean, you can only work in East with that diploma, you cannot work in West. So there were kind of a standard difference between these. So well, most of the curiosity is about that, whether, I mean, they accept this ground as a kind of a first degree project, or they just use their names and give it. Because some of the offices do that, really. I mean, they have lots of branch offices. They market their labels and names, but they do not really become inspirational. And I have seen in Turkey, there are lots of, for example, international firms giving proposals to some projects, but they do not do anything unique, but they just take something out from their archive and they mix it up, and then within 10 or 15 days they develop a proposal. Even sometimes they do not come to Turkey. For example, in the Kartal case, which was a big competition, it was about the planning of a district in Istanbul, a very large district, and there were lots of entries, international entries, etc. I mean, on one hand, you cannot understand. I mean, even in 2 or 3 months' time, nobody can understand the situation. You cannot walk around the streets.
You need a really intimate knowledge to plan a district.
So, I mean, what you can do is just you can introduce an image and your power that you are capable to do this. So, I mean, if I get the job, I will think and I will start
and
over.
Then do the research.
So the product doesn't represent the real solution, the real case, but a capacity or possibility of the office that may do that. So these are some issues, I think, considering. But the other cases, many of the Turkish architectural offices are working together with international offices all around the world. Not in Turkey, limited with Turkey, especially in Turkic geographies, in former Soviet Union, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, or Dubai, Gulf region in general. Even in Africa, there are lots of Turkish offices because, I mean, the architectural offices has a more flexible organization in Turkey. They can act very quickly. They can produce very quickly.
I think also I was talking to some of the editors at YEM, and they were saying to me, for instance, I was talking about building standards, and you know that you obviously have national standards here, but you're also using. There's a kind of very adaptive approach in terms of, you know, taking sustainability standards from LEED or BREEAM, or understanding, you know, what a client wants, and just being very, very flexible. And I think seeing that as a positive rather than thinking, well, you don't have your own standard, is very important.
What do you see? What do you think? What will happen next?
Here or in the rest of the world?
In general, in the rest of the world.
It's always very difficult to say what is going to happen next. I think in terms of technology, I was asked this question, and we've just published a title on robots. And I think where it's, you know, we had the whole emphasis on the digital, on computerized design, computation, but now I think it's going to be on the sort of the creation, the making, robotics, automation. It's going to shift to the world of things. You know, you're seeing Apple also investing in the kind of whole home thing with having smart homes as well. So I think there's going to be a big shift over the next few years into that kind of area.
Third machine age.
Yeah. I think that in terms of technology, where that's going. I mean, there's interest in 3D printing and 4D printing and all that kind of stuff. And we're always kind of looking at we're doing an issue on space architecture at the moment. So it's always kind of diverse in terms of where we're going with things. And within our sort of, I mean, AD has been well known for doing stuff on the digital, but on the other hand, our other kind of strength has been on talking about perception, about experience. We publish Yahani Plasma, Eyes of the Skin, you know, thinking about the real built qualities of buildings as well. And I think that's a really important debate that needs to go on, and I think it needs to be a debate that is not regarded as reactionary. You know, it you know, really kind of, I think when people visit buildings, they get excited, and they really experience really good spaces, and that's something that I think hasn't been lost. I think sometimes that comes through in social media, that people want to take photos of something they've actually been to and they've physically experienced as well. So I think that's a very important aspect of architecture that we mustn't kind of lose. It mustn't become about the image.
Is there any buildings recently realized which you can classify as really innovative, different, I mean, which you suggest anybody who's going to go to England, London to visit? Or
That's really difficult.
Difficult to give names always.
No, I wouldn't.
Is it because, I mean, there are none, or
no? I think
many,
it
too
is.
many.
Yeah, I think it's like if people say to me, "Who's the next people coming through?" It's very, very difficult because you have these dominance of these big practices, and you're not really seeing work at that, particularly public work at the kind of. It's much harder for younger practices to come through. They tend to be more collaborative as well, so they're less about name.
That's true, yes. Bigger offices has more chance, inevitably.
Yeah, more chance.
Boutique offices are disappearing, inevitably, everywhere in the world.
I think one of the interesting things which happened in London, we had something called the Sensing Places exhibition at the Royal Academy, and in which sort of small structures were commissioned from architects all over the world. So trying to really show architecture in a different way as well was interesting.
Is there anything that you want to add, or?
No, I think that's about it, really. But I'm kind of really curious about Turkey, and having come for the first time, I'd like to really kind of continue to follow the scene and to learn more about it.
Yeah, this may be a basis for having a better communication and interaction, and maybe we can contribute more to architectural design. Really thank you very much for being with us, and within this short notice and short time. I think it was very nice to meet you, first of all, and then having this conversation, and hope to be with you again in Turkey. Thanks a lot.
Oh, well, thank you.